everyone. This is the Crime Cafe, your podcasting source of great crime, suspense, and thriller writing. I'm your host, Debbie Mack. Before I bring on my guest, I'll just remind you that the Crime Cafe has 2 ebooks for sale, the 9-book box set and the short story anthology. You can find the buy links for both on my website, debbiemack.com, under the Crime Cafe link. You can also get a free copy of either book if you become a Patreon supporter. You'll get that and much more if you support the podcast on Patreon, along with our eternal gratitude for doing so. But first, let me put in a good word for Blueberry Podcasting. I've been using Blueberry Podcasting as my hosting service for my podcast for years, and it's one of the best decisions I ever made. They provide great service. You're in complete control of your own podcast. You never have to leave your own website. There is a plugin that you can use to incorporate Blueberry and distribution through your website. So it's a great service that has taken a lot of the work of podcasting out for me. And I find for that reason that it's a company that I can get behind 100% and say, you should try this. If you want a podcast, try out Blueberry. It doesn't require a long-term contract. It's just a great company, period. And I am a Blueberry affiliate, so there's that. And did I mention that they have free technical support by email, video, and phone? Yes, you can actually reach a human being there. I'll say no more. Hi, everyone. Today I have a guest making his second appearance on the podcast. A retired police officer, he hails from the great state of Oregon. The author of more than 30 novels, including the River City series and the Charlie 316 series. He also hosts his own podcast, Wrong Place, Right Crime, which I have had the pleasure of being on. My guest today is Frank Zafiro. Hi, Frank. Welcome back, and thanks for being here.
Hey, Debbie. Great to be back again.
Excellent. Wonderful. It's good to see you. You seem to be making something of a career out of writing collaborative novels and series. Can you write them faster than you would if you were writing them on your own, or is it about the same?
Oh, I think it's faster for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, you are, you're only writing about half of the first draft, so that's so it's faster, but the other thing is that when you're working, and the bigger piece is when you're working with someone else, there's a certain synergy that kicks in, and you really gain momentum. And so when you get the piece back and it's your turn to write something, you're energized, and you also don't want to keep your partner waiting. In some cases, the person I'm working with, they're not working on anything else, at least not in the first draft stage. And so I'm kind of holding them up while we're doing this, in a way, is how I feel about it. So I want to get it back to them as quick as possible. But I think it would happen either way, because you just get that really strong momentum going, that you're building something great, and it goes really fast. I mean, Charlie 316 took like 3 weeks, and it was a 100,000 word draft. I mean, to me, that blew my mind when we got to the end of it and looked at how long it had taken.
Oh my gosh, that was for a first draft, right?
Yeah, and the thing of it is it's a first draft, but the way that the process works, it's a pretty tight first draft, because it's been essentially edited twice, once by each of us throughout the process. So, but yeah, it's still technically a first draft.
Well, that's fantastic. 3 weeks. Wow.
That's a bit of an aberration, but that's a good example of how quickly things can happen.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, would most of them be like that?
Most of them are like that, not quite as fast, but there hasn't been one that for in which that first draft lagged or dragged. They've all gone quickly. You know, sometimes the editing process has gone just as quickly. Other times it's taken a little bit longer, and we've gone about it differently, or we've been more methodical, or taken our time, or other projects have pushed it onto the shelf briefly, and then we pull off and get back to work on it, or when it's ready to go, deciding how to approach it, whether to send it to an agent, a publisher, or to publish it independently. That's a stage it maybe it's sat for a while, um, but in each of the cases, and I think I've done, I'd have to go back and count, but it's at least 12 books. Every one of them went quick in the initial first draft stage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, I was curious about how many books you work on at the same time this way, if you do work on other books at the same time, and how you release the books. Do you do a release on one series, then another, or do you sort of alternate between the series? How does that work?
Um, so I tend to not work on more than one book at a time in the first draft mode. I've kind of learned to, um, on a creative level, to try to stay in the same skin. And so that might be another reason why it goes pretty quickly, because if I have something else to get to, I know I need to get through this to get to that, and I can't get to that till we're done. So let's get busy. But I don't feel that same restriction when it comes to editing. I feel like that's a little easier to do regardless of what else you're doing. And so at any given time, I might be working on one book, um, whether that's my own or a collaboration, editing another book. Again, could be a collaboration, could be one of my solo works, and I might be reading, beta reading, doing a deep critique for one of my friends or co-authors on a completely different book that I had, that I didn't write or didn't have any input on. And so I can do that with the editing. I can work on multiple things at once, but try to stay on just the one with the actual first draft. Um, and then your second question, you're talking about. Can you clarify on that? I want to make sure I answer it correctly.
Um, I was curious about release schedules, basically.
Hmm.
You have several series, and I didn't know
Right.
whether you released all the books in one series before you went on to the next one, or if you mixed them up.
Well, historically, it's been kind of staggered. Initially, I just was writing the River City series, my main series,
Mm-hmm.
and I had several books in that series come out before I had written anything in another series. But once I started writing multiple series, I kind of started lily padding from one to the other, and trying to kind of give them all a little bit of love. But it's also dictated by what story has kind of forced its way to the top of my consciousness, and I might have notes. Well, I do. I have notes for half a dozen different books in different series, but which one gets written next sometimes is the product of which one's screaming the loudest at me.
Mm-hmm.
Which fictional character refuses to be denied. That might be the one that gets worked on next, and essentially as soon as they're finished in terms of the editing process and the book cover and all the other things that go along with that, if I'm releasing them independently, I try to get them out as soon as they're ready, with a little bit of strategy, but frankly, I don't put a lot of stock in long pre-order periods, or let's time it with Valentine's Day. I mean, or something like that. My attitude is, hey, the book is ready. Um, the only thing I might take into consideration is, hey, I don't want to release it in competition with another of my own releases or my co-authors releases, so I might be strategic in that sense.
Hmm.
But I feel like if I'm the reader and you're the writer, I mean, I want the next Sam McRae book as soon as you're done with it. I don't want to wait 6 months, so get that baby out there. I try to be with my own stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. Um, so I take it that you are generally the one who comes up with the idea for the series or book, or have the collaborators come to you with ideas for the
Um,
segments?
yeah,
The main
oh no,
idea. Hmm.
yeah, it's my collaborators have done a lot of heavy lifting on these series. Just to give you an example, uh, the first series that I ever collaborated on was, I believe, was the Anya trilogy. Well, now it's actually got a prequel, so it's a quadrilogy with Jim Wilsky, and that one I think we kind of tailored that one up together. That was pretty mutual. And then although I will say that Jim came up with 3 out of the 4 titles, and I think all 4 of the locations and settings and stuff. Um, and in all cases, Debbie, the collaborators I've worked with, it's been a true 50-50 split. Nobody's been senior or junior at all. But in terms of the genesis of the ideas, um, when I did the Bricks and Cam Job series with Eric Beetner, he came up with that premise. He wanted to do
Hmm.
this 2 hitmen idea, and then we went from there. And working with Colin Conway and the Charlie 316 series, which is the most recent collaboration that I've had come out. That's a 4 book arc, but when he came to me with the first idea, he had a very solid idea and a premise and a basic structure already in place. And really, he was coming to me because of my experience in my career in law enforcement, having been involved in executive level leadership. There were things happening in that book that he wanted to peek behind that curtain, and he'd really never been in that room very much, and certainly not in that role. And so he's like, "Hey, I mean, I want your expertise on this." Um, and so that's how I got brought in, almost as a consultant, kind of initially.
That's great.
So yeah, my co-authors have been fantastic. They've done easily 50% of the heavy lifting on every single one of the books.
Well, it's fantastic. It's nice that you can have the idea or for the premise. That's really what I was thinking about, the big picture kind
Mm-hmm.
of what is this story about? Or
Mm-hmm.
they could, either way, you guys can work together. Um, has the pandemic affected you or your collaborators at all?
Well, of course, I mean, just like it has everyone else. I mean, on a personal slash professional level, I mean, I started writing, working on my writing career and podcasting full time at the end of 2017. I had retired from law enforcement in 2013, and I was teaching leadership pretty much full time after that for about 4 years. And so from 2018, 2019, and a little over 2 years, I was living at home, had the house to myself all day, just me and the dogs and the cat. And I was a hermit pretty much, right? I didn't deal with anybody except, my wife would come and go and to work. And then the pandemic hit, and it hit about a month after my stepson was staying with us, just kind of in a transitional period. He was moving from one job in one location to another, and he's just going to stay here for about 3 weeks. And then, bam, the pandemic hit, and he was here for ended up being, till almost Thanksgiving, I think, or something like that. I mean, he kind of was locked in place. And then my wife, a teacher, she's suddenly teaching from home, and so this not very big house suddenly had 3 people in it full time all the time. And I have a podcast, so I'm trying to record stuff for that. And so everybody's having to tiptoe, and I'm having to time it around when Christy's teaching her kids, because she's teaching live, and I'm having to tiptoe and be careful, and of course Brian's trying to be as unobtrusive as possible, and we're all in this small house, and of course everybody's worried about being sick, and do I go visit family? I mean, all the things I'm saying, I think probably all of your listeners experience something like that in this unprecedented times that we've lived in. What it didn't do really is stop me from being able to work on the written page, or to be able to work with the people that I was collaborating with. I mean, Colin and I wrote big chunks of the Troy 316 series during the pandemic. I wrote a book with Larry Kelter that is not released yet, but we wrote that and edited it, and rewrote it during the pandemic. So
I was going to say, the potential for people to work together is so much greater now that people are using Zoom.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, if
yeah.
you want to work with somebody and have almost a workshop atmosphere, you can do it.
I think people got more comfortable with it too. I mean, I mentioned Eric Beatner earlier. I wrote 3 books with him, 3 entire books. We never spoke even on the phone, much less over Zoom. And then we finally met when I came on his podcast as a guest. That was the first time we'd ever spoken live, and which is just completely bizarre. Um, but the online world, I think, opened up for a lot of people when it became necessary. It became absolutely a requirement, and people, were able to work from home. But in some ways, I'm sure it wasn't a big switch for me. I mean, I've been doing it, since 2013, and exclusively since 2018, working only on this kind of stuff. But it was a big transition for someone like my wife trying to teach, and she worked she's been working extremely hard since March of 2020. And anybody who thinks teachers have just been sitting at home collecting a paycheck, well, this is probably a family show, so I won't express my true feelings on the matter, but they deserve a poke in the nose because they're ignorant. Um,
Many people are ignorant, about
I'm,
school teachers.
I'm amazed at how hard that she's worked. It's basically been having to recreate her entire curriculum and learn a new delivery method, and she stuck with it. And so the transition for me hasn't been nearly that difficult, because I was almost living the lockdown life, self-imposed prior to that.
Believe me, I understand that.
I know you do. I know you do.
Yeah, I mean, I was just pretty much at home, just doing this.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, teachers, what people don't realize is that teachers aren't getting paid for those summers off either. That's another thing they don't realize.
Just because they get a paycheck doesn't mean they're getting paid. I mean, they're paid for the nearly 10 months that they worked each year, and then it's just prorated over a 12-month period, because that's easier it's actually easier for the government bookkeeping. Yeah, absolutely. Easier for the district. But yeah, it's funny. I was a police officer for 20 years. And, she's been a teacher for almost that long. And when we first, we knew each other since we were kids, but when we reconnected as adults, and eventually when we got married, and we were spending all this time together, we got to talking about our careers. And one of the things we both noticed was how many parallels there were between the 2 careers, both of them being, public service related, and both of them, being a vital function of society. And the other thing that we both noticed and talked about was how there's a lot of people out there who have misconceptions about our job, and a lot of people who think they know exactly what our job is and how we should be doing it, and aren't afraid to tell us that, and in the police realm, it's I guess it's I saw CSI, so I know what's what, and in the teaching realm, it seems to be, hey, I went to school, I have a kid, so I know everything I need to know about it. And it could be a little frustrating at times, to be honest with you.
Oh, well, as a former attorney, I mean, as a lawyer who used to practice law, I know what it's like to be to have one's career misrepresented, let's say,
Right.
or
Right.
whatever. And my husband is a retired DC firefighter, so I think I get where you're coming from.
Yeah, I think firefighters suffer that too, although not, I don't think quite as much because they just have better PR. And let's face it, I mean, their job doesn't end up
Involving
require.
guns.
Well, it doesn't require them to necessarily for their actions to be unpleasant for people. I mean,
Exactly.
for normal people out there, and I mean when I mean normal, I mean people who aren't involved in a lot of criminal behavior or extremely unlucky, I guess. But for your average American, the times that they see the police are when either they've done the stupidest thing they've ever done in their life, or they've had the worst thing that's probably ever going to happen to them in their life just happened to them, or they're in the middle of a crisis that doesn't happen every day. And so it's these rare moments that are usually negative. I mean, and then when the police come, they're not necessarily making it better or fixing it. I mean, if you just screwed up, you're probably getting arrested. If something bad happened to you, you just got your house burglarized, the cops aren't going to show up with all your stuff in their trunk. It doesn't work that way. At least firefighters, they show up and somebody isn't feeling good, they take them to the hospital, or something's on fire and they spray water on it, and people thank them for it. And they have a great PR. I mean, they're great at PR too, and there's always been that healthy, like, brotherly, sisterly rivalry between cops and firefighters. Ultimately they realize that they're on the same team and get along. But of course there's, we used to tease the firefighters that the firefight creed was, eat till you're tired, sleep till you're hungry, and so
Yeah.
she hang out at the fire station. But I'll tell you what, I got injured a couple of times on the job, and it wasn't lawyers who came and fixed me up. It was medics, it was the firefighters. So
Absolutely.
and I've had some really good friends who that's been their job, and so I admire them. But people think they know what firefighters are all about, and they really don't necessarily have the whole picture.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Would you like to talk more about Charlie 316 or about your podcast?
I think Charlie 316, to be honest with you.
Tell us about it.
It's a 4-book series. It's one of those series that does have a beginning and an end. It's not open ended like most of my other book series are. I wrote it with Colin Conway, who I mentioned before, and he did come up with the idea, and he brought it to me. And the more we talked about it and put some meat on those bones, and started working with it, it took on a life of its own. But the initial story is about a police officer who is just a model officer. He's a golden child of the department in the community. Good looking, great shape, family man, tactically sound, hard worker, beloved in the community. He gets into a shooting in chapter 1. Spoiler alert. But he gets into a shooting in chapter 1 that immediately starts to look like it could be a bad incident. The driver doesn't have a weapon, and has been shot in the back, and so questions are immediately going to arise, and rightfully so. And so the book progresses from there, giving the reader, you get to experience as the reader, what that officer's going through, what the detectives that are investigating are seeing, what the police leadership is seeing and doing, what the community reaction is, and what's happening there, what's happening at City Hall. And the question of that book really quickly becomes, what will the department, what will the city do? Will they hang this guy out to dry, sacrifice him on the altar of public opinion, or will they stand by him as they discover, what really happened? And then, of course, a couple of twists and turns come in that I won't spoil, that really changed the complexity of that question and ultimately the entire series, which, as the series continues, the latter three books really become an examination of the whole concept of policing in the U.S. and some of the pitfalls that exist there, and it becomes about how every character and every person is essentially gray, and some are on the darker end of the scale, and some are on the very lighter end of the scale, but nobody is completely one or the other. And you, as the reader, get to decide by the end of the series whether you're going to put that person in the good or the bad category based on what their actions have been throughout the entire series. Um, and so this has been a question that's been on my mind, for a lot of years. The idea of policing in America and the community's relationship with their police department, and we wanted to explore one aspect of it in this series. But it's not a social essay. They're procedural thrillers. So there's a lot of tension, there's action, there's realistic events, although we get amp them up and blow them up like you do in fiction. But if people want something gritty and realistic, then they're in the right place.
I was going to say it is, and it's also really relevant. I mean, it's the kind of topic that people are talking about, people are concerned with. So there's
I
that.
think so. I think so. And we kind of flipped the script a little bit in that first book purposefully to perhaps put people back on their heels just a tiny bit so they might look at things differently. This was Colin's concept, and I really like what he came up with. And that was, this takes place in Spokane, Washington, which is a predominantly white city. And so the person who gets shot is white. But Tyler Garrett, this model police officer that we're talking about, is black. And he's one of the few black officers on the department. And as often happens, is pretty much best practice in the profession today, when an agency has an officer involved shooting, another agency is the one that conducts the investigation, and that's just good practice. But the home agency, or the host agency, whatever you want to call them, does assign a detective to shadow that investigation, just to make sure that they do a good job and that they look into everything, and that they don't overlook anything. And so it's kind of creates this double transparency situation. And in Charlie 316, the detective who is the shadow detective that's linked up with the sister agency detectives looking into this shooting, is one of the few black detectives on the department. And so race is definitely an issue that we explore in this first book as best as we can.
Mm-hmm. Well, being an entertaining read at the same time, which is important.
Which is always the primary goal. I mean,
yeah.
telling a good story is the primary goal. But we wanted to do even more than that. We wanted to get people thinking, and if you get people thinking, then maybe they're not relying on their own entrenched positions. Maybe they're thinking about a subject in a way that can change that entrenched thinking, because that's certainly what we have in many places in America now, is very, people not looking for information, but looking for validation of their, or confirmation of their pre-existing, biases. And we want to, try to maybe nudge people past that a little bit. So
that's a laudable goal. And you've had the podcast since when?
I think 2018 is when I started the podcast. I'd have to go back and look. I'm in my fourth season, but the seasons were a little uneven to start with. But it runs from September to June. I took the summers off to spend more time with my wife when she's out of school. Yeah. And right now they drop weekly during that time period, with one feature episode a month that's about an hour long, and then the rest are open and shut episodes that run about 15 or 20 minutes. And I talk mostly to people like you, other crime fiction authors. So it's similar to the Crime Cafe in that regard. In that I try to talk to just folks who write mysteries. All subgenres, though. I don't necessarily just find people who write what I write. I try to mix it up and talk to people who write cozies, who write thrillers, and even throw a few curveballs, people maybe that aren't even crime fiction writers.
Well, that's cool. I think that's great. Um, who handles the technical aspects of your podcast? Do you do all the
So
work?
it's a one-man show, yeah.
Same
So
here. One woman, whatever. Yeah.
yeah, I'll take credit for anything that works out, and I'll blame it on the dog or the cat if something goes wrong.
These things happen. Technology will let you down sometimes.
Well, I'm not as brave as you are. I'm strictly audio, and you've delved into the video element, which I just think is very, very ambitious, very brave. I don't. I'm not ready for that. I'll stick with just the audio.
It's interesting. I just decided, why not? And I thought,
Mhm.
this way I can just talk to people rather than trying to
Right.
write everything down, which is kind of nice.
Mhm.
Let's see. There were other things I was going to ask you. Oh, have you released any of your work in audiobook form?
Yeah, yeah. A good chunk of it is in audio. I kind of jumped on the audio train, um, like 8 or 9 years ago, when the royalty share arrangement was pretty popular on ACX on Audible. More recently, after kind of learning about audio technology and so forth, mastering and everything through working on the podcast, I've started to delve into recording and producing them myself. So my trial run was the short story collection, The Cleaner, where I narrated all but two of the stories, and then my wife narrated two flash fiction stories that were from a female narrator. So I wanted to try that, and so that was kind of my first foray into that, and it passed quality control. It's out there. If people want to give it a listen, and I'm working on the Sugar Got Low, which is my most recent short story collection. But for that one, I've been using multiple narrators. I think there's going to be like 6 or so different narrators, including myself and Christy, but another 4 or so different people that were chosen specifically for a specific story. So it's a collection, not an anthology, but from a narration standpoint, it's kind of like an anthology in that there'll be like 7 different people narrating a total of 13 stories.
Cool. Very cool. Let's see, where can people find you online?
Pretty easily, frankzafiro.com. Zafiro is Zafiro is my website, and pretty much everything is linked through there. The podcast, all of the books, and so forth, and appearances like this, I've got those linked under a tab as well. So that's probably the best place to find me. But my books are out there on Amazon and elsewhere as well.
Have you ever considered crowdfunding a book?
That's an interesting question. Have you done it?
I have done it, actually. Yeah.
Well,
I won't say I've done it successfully, but I've done it. I've raised some money.
Well, I'll have to ask you what worked and what didn't in that regard. I actually have considered it for I write mainstream and children's fiction under my given name, and fantasy. I'm branching out into fantasy under another pen name, and I have a project that I've started and I've been working on. But I thought about that idea of crowdfunding for the fantasy novel simply because I'd like to really invest in the art both in terms of the cover and the maps, and then maybe additionally, art inside the book and on the website. And that's more expensive than just a straightforward cover, because you're talking about artists who are hand drawing something that's 100% unique versus maybe photo manipulation of existing images, which is still an art form that's beyond me. And so I thought maybe crowdfunding might be a way to go there, to get the money up front and really go big and get some really great art involved in this, because I'm pretty excited about the story itself. But fantasy is one of those genres, I think, where cover art and associated art is more important. I mean, a mystery novel certainly needs a good cover, and people do decide whether to give your book a look or even a read based on the cover. So I'm not diminishing its importance, but I feel like it has an even greater importance in the mystery genre. So hey, maybe I'll take your suggestion and run with it.
Well, that's cool. I hope so, because I think that crowdfunding is not only a great way to potentially make money and get payback some of the costs of production, but to develop a readership.
Yeah.
People are investing in your product because they have a level of belief in it and can relate to it in some way. So
I've been on the other side of that. I've invested in things.
Same here. Yeah.
Various things. Never a book yet, but computer games and card games or board games that I've been interested in. That I mean, if it looks like a cool idea, I'd like to see it come to fruition. You support it, and it gets there, and so it's kind of fun to get that product at the end of it all, and you were part of it from the inception, and so there's that sense of belonging, and that that being a piece of the creation. And so I would expect that would carry over in a book scenario as well.
Absolutely, I would think so. Is there anything else you'd like to mention before we finish up?
Boy, that's a loaded question. I could mention about 40 different things.
Well, of course.
I just
Anything
say that
related to your books or your podcast.
Well, I mean, I'm over 100 episodes on the podcast now, so people can find a lot of different authors, yourself included, in the back episodes. There, it's definitely worth a peek, and it's available on all different platforms. Wherever you get your podcast, I can 99% guarantee that Wrong Place, Right Crime is there. And I think the same accessibility exists within my published books. If you like procedurals, I have the River City series, the Charlie 316 series. If you like, noir or hard boiled, the Anya trilogy fits that. The Spokompton series fits that. If you like a little dark humor and action, the books I wrote with Eric Beetner, the Bricks and Cam Job series fit that. I mean, pretty much every subgenre of mystery, except for cozy, I've got you covered. And with my co-authors, what I don't have, they do. I mean, Colin Conway writes a cozy series. Bonnie Paulson writes romance. So between me and my co-authors, I dare say anything that's remotely mystery. I mean, Lawrence Kelter writes a novelization of the My Cousin Vinny books, which are funny. So humor is whatever you want, we've got it. So dive in and click around and try whatever it is that you might like.
Cool, very cool. Well, Frank, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It's been fun talking to you, and I always learn a lot from talking to authors. I tell you, you guys are full of great information.
Yeah, I can attest to that. Being a host, you learn something. You never know what it's going to be, but you learn something from every guest.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Just best of luck with everything you're doing. It's great.
Well,
Um,
thank you, and congratulations on your success with the Crime Cafe. I mean, when I reached out to you about coming back on at some point, I think you were almost a year out in your scheduling because it was in high demand. So that's fantastic. Congratulations.
it's really not totally unexpected. I got to tell you that. Totally unexpected.
I'm not
And
surprised in the least.
well, thank you. And just so you know, everyone, we greatly appreciate your giving the Crime Cafe Patreon page a look. You can see that I offer a variety of perks for supporters of the podcast there, including shout outs on social media, podcast mentions, and credit as a producer or associate producer, depending on your level of support. So please don't miss that. You'll find the link on my website. You can also find it in the show notes to this podcast. And I will be back in 2 weeks with another guest, another author. In the meantime, happy reading.